in a situation where an invading alien army is coming, and they have the technology to be able to listen in on humanity, on every level of human interaction, except human thought. Difficult to even imagine, but if you read the book, you'll understand how it can be done. It's actually quite brilliant. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to this episode of Fantasy for Our Time, where we are talking today about the Three Body Problem series, in particular, volume 2 of that series, which is called The Dark Forest. As always, these episodes are live streamed for my Patreon community. And if you'd like to be present at the live stream, ask questions, and be part of a special Q&A session, come and join us at patreon.com/Nicholas Kotar. This series has been on my radar for a little bit of time, as I'm sure it has for a lot of you. There was a lot of noise about it, probably closer in the five years ago range, when it really started to appear in the consciousness of Western readers. The author, whose name I will not attempt to pronounce, had already had a fairly successful career in China as a science fiction writer, and this his entry into the Western consciousness mirrored, or perhaps began, I'm not entirely sure, a larger entry of Chinese sci-fi into the Western consciousness. We didn't know this, but actually there is a very vibrant sci-fi tradition over in China. It just is a very different kind of science fiction than what we are used to. And perhaps the freshness of it, the uniqueness of the style compared to much of what we're used to in Western science fiction and fantasy helped promote it. But also, this particular story is just a really interesting and unexpected entry into invasion sci-fi, a subgenre that began probably with H.G. Wells, possibly even before, and many people might think had kind of run its course and become something already on the trite, boring, conventional side. This series blew that straight out of the water. So it wasn't surprising to me when the team behind Game of Thrones over in HBO land decided to take this series as their next creative challenge. I ended up signing up for a Netflix subscription precisely to watch season 1 of what they called Three Body Problem, the number 3, which ended up actually being a kind of pleasing, aesthetically pleasing name change. The name of the series is The Three Body Problem with a hyphen, and the number 3 being actually written out. But there's something about the number 3 without the article, body problem, being a kind of I'm not sure why, really. It might have something to do with design that I can't articulate properly, not being somebody who's in design, but it works very well. And so when you have a kind of perfect fusion of good storytelling, an interesting design element to the title itself, as well as some really good visuals in the show itself, it made for a very pleasing experience for me. I really enjoyed watching Three Body Problem. I mean, enjoyed. It's a dark and very depressing story in a lot of ways. So I use enjoyed, in a qualified manner, especially considering, by the way, those of you, and I will say this straight out from the beginning, those of you who have any sort of tender stomach for intense violence, episode 5, you've been warned. All right. The thing that you think is about to happen actually does happen, and it is awful. It is truly harrowing and awful. Some things that I loved about the TV series, before I get into the books, is the visuals, very strong visuals, very good writing, excellent character work, and diverse cast in the best possible way. This is an improvement on the text in that in the book, all most of the main characters are Chinese. It's written for a Chinese audience. Here, it's a much more diverse cast in terms of having representatives of all kinds of age groups, peoples, nations, ethnicities, etc. Um, and they're all interesting characters. Many of them are pleasing to the eye, which doesn't hurt, and their individual goals, motivations, conflicts, journeys come together in ways that, although sometimes verge on the soapy, there's a reason for that. I'll talk about that in a second. Ultimately, play second fiddle to the larger implications of the story arc itself, the great danger that everybody finds themselves in, and the yeah, absolutely insane hard sciency type stuff that most people find very off-putting, but that the writers of the show managed to make very, very compelling and interesting. Now, I'll be open. I did not read volume 1 of Three Body Problem, of the Three Body Problem series. I watched the show, and knowing that the show was going to take some creative liberties with the rest of the series, I decided that I wouldn't read volume 1 and that I would take the the show as my experience of reading volume 1. Some of you, especially those of you who are hardline fans of this, I'm sure do not like me doing this. Honestly, I don't care. But the the point is you can actually enjoy volume 2 as long as you have a baseline understanding of how the characters in the show are different from the characters in the books. I'm going to be very obnoxiously and chauvinistically Western for a second and say that my lack of familiarity with Chinese customs makes reading Chinese science fiction in general a little bit more difficult than other fiction from other places of the world that I have more comfort with, in particular because the names are difficult, the naming conventions are difficult from what they are in the West. But another reason is actually nothing to do with the fact that I don't follow Chinese culture and many in the West don't, is an interesting element of Chinese science fiction that should be talked about. And that is that there's a particular style, and I am generalizing, I understand, but there is some truth to this generalization, as there is for many generalizations. There is a particular style to a lot of Chinese science fiction in the way that the story is told. This has to do with some technical things that you who are not writers won't care about, but things like point of view and authorial voice. Chinese science fiction tends to prioritize the interest of scientific ideas over the compelling emotional arcs of individual characters. What this means is that very often the characters begin to kind of blur, and the names become very important for you to determine who is who, because it's hard sometimes, especially in the beginning of a story, to recognize the differences in characters based on how they are navigating their world. Their vocal inflection is all very much the same. They tend to have similar kinds of thoughts, and they don't have the kinds of the authors don't really put the kind of work into creating the interior world of the character that we in the West are used to. The kind of deep uh, point of view work that allows us to inhabit a character's experience of the world as though we were directly behind that character's eyes. This is a much more distanced kind of point of view where we are kind of floating above everything and only very glancingly getting into the interior world of the characters. Now, if this kind of approach, this kind of style is done well, it can be very effective. And in the Three Body Problem series, it is done to great effect. Um, First of all, because the rare moments where the characters are allowed to have deeply emotional experiences, you feel it much, much more strongly because it's not normal for the rest of the characters to have deeply emotional arcs. Most of them are just placeholders for interesting scientific ideas. So when one or two of the characters do have profoundly human emotional experiences, they stick out in bright and beautiful colors. There in particular, there's a long and incredibly imaginative sequence where one of the characters, who ends up being the main character of the entire series, has an experience of writing into existence a character from one of his novels. And if that sounds insane, it is. But the way that the author describes this process is one of the most visceral descriptions in print that I've ever seen of the actual experience of a writer having an intimate relationship with a character. He does it inside the story in a way that is very unexpected, unusual, and very, very powerful. So that when an actual human in the story comes in and inhabits the space of the imagined character in a way that seems almost impossible, the emotional resonance that the character feels towards this person, the intense love and romantic attachment that the character has towards this person is made much clearer to the reader because there's been this insane, I've never seen anything like this before in fiction, where an imagined romance between an author and a character he has created is given the kind of emotional immediacy as an actual romance in an actual novel. It's fantastic. Um, in addition to this, the rare instances of actual human characters having human interactions are very strong because of the general, like as I mentioned, the general kind of lack of emotional involvement of the characters with each other throughout most of the book. And the style is not one to enhance the emotional connection between the reader and the character. So that when it happens, it's quite intense and it's quite beautiful. The second thing, and this is a strength of Chinese sci-fi, is that this allows for the brilliance of the scientific ideas, the sci-fi elements, the actual, science-y stuff that a lot of people who are not hardcore sci-fi readers don't like. In the presentation of this particular book, it really comes out strongly. And even if the concepts are difficult, and they are, the author, by virtue of having this distancing effect between the reader and the characters, can inhabit kind of the role of almost a university professor who's explaining difficult scientific concepts, but through storytelling methods. And it means that you can actually, as a reader, inhabit incredibly difficult scientific paradigms and you can actually understand them because they are firmly wedded within the dramatic uh the plot arcs of the story, while only tangentially being connected to the emotional involvement of the characters within that plot. It makes for a very interesting and very unusual reading experience that can be off-putting initially, but once you get into it, once the revelations start to come, especially in book 2, which has a really unique and fascinating premise, and that is that in a situation where an invading alien army is coming and they have the technology to be able to listen in on humanity on every level of human interaction except human thought. Difficult to even imagine, but if you read the book, you'll understand how it can be done. It's actually quite brilliant. If that is the case, and they are still 400 years away, how are you as a humanity? And by the way, there's a limit placed because of the superiority of the alien technology. They've effectively stopped advanced uh, advanced scientific research. Physics has died. And so humanity can't make the kind of quick technological advances that might be able to help them defeat this incoming armada of an extremely advanced alien civilization that will probably destroy them and can listen in on every single one of their active interactions, except thought. So the premise then is presented. The only way you can defeat it is if you have a group of people who are universes unto themselves. They are called Wallfacers, as in they literally face the wall, and they do all their thinking, their strategic thinking, in how to fix the problem of the coming invasion of a technologically superior alien race by doing it all in their head and by not talking about it to anyone, but by also externally acting in a way that is intended to um, fool the sensors of the aliens, because the aliens cannot understand. They have no concept of fabrication. They cannot lie because they're a race that speaks that communicates telepathically. So for them, the idea of dissembling is impossible. So this is an advantage. The external actions has a caste system. Yes. So the external actions of these wall facers should be intentionally and deliberately um, meant to deceive the aliens. Unfortunately, since they can't talk about what they're thinking to anyone, that limits their effectiveness because how are you going to be able to bring into action the thing you're thinking without revealing your hand to an alien civilization that can hear and see everything that you do. It's a fantastic premise. Add to that the presence of a cult of humans inside human society that is dedicated to the coming of these aliens as though they are a kind of supernatural race of beings that are going to emancipate humanity from itself, who actively go and do the will of these aliens at a distance. So you have, for every wall facer, you have a wall breaker who is hidden. And the purpose of this person is to figure out what the wall facer is thinking. Now, there are four wall facers, three of them fail miserably. And each revelation of the wall facer's strategy by their wall breaker is a dramatic plot point that moves, propels the drama and the plot forward. It is really, really well done. And it keeps the reader guessing. You have no idea what's going to happen until the very, very end, where we figure out at the end what the final wall facer's plan was and how it, spoiler alert, does become successful. Now, I've only read book two. Book two has a happy ending, but the implication is that there's something in book three that will complicate the happy ending of book two. I haven't read it yet. I'm not sure I'll read it in the near future. For the purposes of this video, I think it's enough to consider the stories of books one and two as a single unit. I might change my mind after I read book three, but that's not going to be for a while. And there's plenty to say about these so far. So this is your spoiler-free section for reading The Dark Forest, for my telling you about The Dark Forest. Highly, highly recommended. Go read it. I don't think you need to read book one if you don't want the rather sometimes heady and difficult experience of reading a story that doesn't have an immediate emotional connection between reader and character. Watch the show if you want, and then read and do like I did. Read volume two. It's not going to be difficult, other than a bit of confusion for the first 50 pages or so as you try to figure out who is who and which characters in the book are meant to be analogs, or are, I should say, which characters in the show correspond to which character in the book. And there are gender swaps, there are race swaps, there are ethnic swaps. So there's a bit of detective work you have to do, but once you figure that out, it's not that hard to go along with the story. Now, from here on out, you've been warned. This is the part that I really want to talk about, the interesting part, but it's spoilery. I can't talk about any of it without actually telling you about the end. So you've been warned. The thing that really, really fascinated me about all this, and the thing that cemented it in my mind as a kind of manifestation of a post-Christian, post-human, I would say even post-human form of science fiction. And note that even though I cannot in any way, shape, or form endorse or embrace the worldview, the apparent worldview of the author, though it's difficult to say what the worldview of an author is inside a totalitarian society, I'm not entirely sure what where the author ends and the characters begin. That was certainly true of the writers in Soviet Russia in the 20th century. I'm sure that's definitely happening right now in Chinese science fiction. And that's why some Chinese science fiction writers are watched by the government while others have the government's endorsement. It's not clear to me what the author's own political and metaphysical worldviews are. But what seems to be presented as the worldview, as the worldview of the people inside the story, and by extension, probably the worldview of the author, is something that is remarkably, remarkably dark. Now, the worldview becomes obvious because of a conflict between two um, semi-scientific postulates. The first one is the Fermi paradox. Now, anybody who's read science fiction and pays any attention to cosmology in general will know about the Fermi paradox, which is something like, if uh, and I'm speaking from a evolutionary perspective, this is not how I would phrase it, but this is how many scientists would phrase it. If evolution made possible life on Earth, the planet Earth, doesn't it make sense that it would do the same in other places because it happened here? It doesn't make sense logically that Earth would be an anomaly based purely on the kind of laws of evolutionary inevitability. Now, I'm not a scientist. I'm bungling all this. Please don't, if you're somebody who is more conversant in this, don't, clip this out and make fun of me. I'm just speaking very, very generally. I mean, you can if you like. Go ahead. I don't care. The idea is, if it's possibly here, where are all the aliens? Why don't we see other worlds with aliens? And the postulate has if in the throughout the 20th century been suggested that it's because our technology isn't advanced enough to be able to see the effects of advanced interstellar civilization out there. Our telescopes are too small. We can't see far enough. We're not seeing the reality of what's going on out there because everything we can see is coming from a vast distance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This kind of thinking. But more and more, the science seems to be leaning towards the strange um, uniqueness of the Earth ecosystem for life itself. Now, what I think that means, but scientists are grappling with this reality. Many cosmologists are coming to a kind of grudging admission or realization that perhaps this is the only planet where life can have arisen, whatever that means for you. Uh, Now, this story takes that paradox and suggests an entirely different answer to the Fermi paradox, and it presents it as something called the dark forest theory. Now, the dark forest theory is not talked about except by implication in the story. Initially, it is told as in the TV show. It's told as a really bad joke involving God and Einstein, which I'm curious to see how they resolve it because it doesn't directly relate to how the theory of something called cosmic sociology is offered to the reader by one of the characters in the novel. Practically speaking, though, we encounter the reality of the dark forest theory when we have a small kind of subplot involving three spaceships that escape a bloodbath where a more advanced human civilization about 200 or 300 years in the future manages to create a space fleet that they think will completely destroy the coming Trisolarians, the invading fleet. And all it takes is a single probe from the Trisolarians to completely destroy the entirety of uh, humanity's space armada, except for three ships that manage to escape in time. Those become representative of a dark strain of human civilization that becomes nomadic, that has no connection to Earth as a home. It becomes the first spacefaring human civilization in history. The first thing that happens is that they all turn on each other, start killing each other, and reduce the total number of people in that armada to the absolute minimum to be able to reach the next refueling station about, I think, 60 light years away. And this is a realization that each of these three ships come to at the same time through kind of a process of elimination that is arrived at through a communal experience of disorientation and discommunion from the home planet. They literally become unhuman through the process of losing their roots, which is uh, a fascinating idea. So if you don't have your any roots connecting you to your home planet, you become a denizen of the dark forest. And the denizens of the dark forest must exist as though everything in the universe is out to get you, because that is the only way you can survive is by remaining quiet. So the best thing you can do then is remove the total number of members of your species to the absolute minimum for survival and then just keep silent and exist. It is an incredibly dark sequence in the book. Um, and it's entirely internally consistent and entirely in line with a purely materialistic worldview. It is scary. Now, that's the first manifestation of the dark force theory that we see. The We see it come to full fruition when we connect something that happens at the beginning of the novel to something that happens in the end. The one Wallfacer who remains successful as one of the strange things that he is allowed to do. Nobody can contradict the will of a wall facer because they're coming up with stuff in their minds, and whatever they do on the outside is intentionally meant to deceive, right? He does this thing where he creates a 3D model of a star system that, and I'm very bad with the math, but basically it's a transmission that's sent out into space that is a marker, a kind of electronic marker inside a 3D mapped out version of the galaxy. He sends it out, a kind of burst of electronic energy to the star system, if essentially marking it with an electronic signature, as though there were the emergence of a technologically advanced sentient civilization in that star system. He calls it a spell. Now, you have to read it to fully understand the implications of it. I don't understand the science of it. I think it does make sense, but I'm not a scientist. So basically, the idea is that he makes it look like way out in the distance, something like 30, 40 light years away, might be less. I don't remember. Um, Looks like an advanced civilization in space arose out of nothing. 200 years later, he finds out that that star system was destroyed and it just stopped existing. What on earth? So that's the spell. He basically made a star system disappear. As we find out by implication and the way that we are that we inhabit this reality, I mean, it's just incredibly well written. But basically, this is confirmation of the fact that the universe is a dark forest. What does that mean? It means it is filled with advanced sentient civilizations, all of whom make it their prerogative, their number one prerogative, to stay quiet and unnoticed by other potentially more advanced civilizations, which is why we don't see any aliens out there, because there are a ton of them and they are all quiet, trying to survive without attracting the attention of a bigger fish. So, what he did when he sent out the electronic message to that star system that had no sentient beings in it was effectively mirror a huge burst of electronic energy that would in fact be similar to what a advanced spacefaring civilization would do, would kind of appear on the cosmic map as a new player in the political games of the dark forest. And what happened was some advanced civilization that had survived by remaining quiet, silent, and hidden immediately destroyed the entire star system rather than allow the potentiality of a new spacefaring civilization to appear. So then, this wall facer, the successful wall facer, essentially provides the invading fleet of Trisolarians with an impossible dilemma. He says, if you do not stop your invading fleet, and if you do not promise to become integrated with the humans in the future, I will cause the same kind of cosmic signal to go out, and then all of us will be destroyed because some advanced, hidden alien civilization will see the emergence of a loud and obnoxious new spacefaring civilization, and they will destroy all of us. And this kind of military deterrence and the kind of admission that the cosmos is a dark predatory place filled with uncounted numbers of principalities and powers that are out to get you is something that eventually causes the detente. And the really strange thing about this story is at the end there's this kind of attempt by the author to suggest that the reason this will work is that humans have the capacity to love, and that their capacity to love will then conquer the Trisolarians, um, the Trisolarians' resistance to integrate with this other advanced civilization of humanity. It rings very hollow, given what we have seen throughout the entire story about the only true reality being save yourself by destroying everybody else, including those within your ranks that are going to be a danger to your continued quiet, contained existence. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for the emergence of love. Now, maybe this is something that in book 3 is explored in greater detail, something I am definitely interested to learn more about, and I'm interested to see where it goes. But as a final thought, and what I really wanted to bring your attention to in this is that this is for the first time in a long time that I've seen a materialist worldview be realistic about what the implications of materialism are for human nature. Far too many materialist atheists uh, act as though in a materialistic universe, humanity should be basically intrinsically good. Too many writers, showrunners, especially those who do not like the Christian worldview, too many of them assume without any good reason that the reason humans are bad is because of institutions that have subverted their natural innate goodness. This book utterly destroys that nonsense idea. Steven Pinker, pay attention. There is no good reason to think that humanity is intrinsically good if you believe in a deterministic, purely materialist world. There isn't. The best you can do is work out a kind of internally consistent system that would put up enough guardrails against the reality of the dark forest and make a kind of detente between our inner need for community and our inner tendency towards violence and self-destruction. That's the best you can do. That's why no human utopia has ever worked. And I know that there are plenty who would disagree with this, but I commend the writer of this series for being realistic about the implications of this worldview because it is very dark. It is very, very dark. It's one of the reasons why Dostoevsky's novels are so effective because they also follow through on this basic premise. If there are no guardrails from the outside, what is there to stop human beings from acting out the dictates of cosmic sorry of yeah yeah of cosmic sociology, which states that the world, the entire cosmos, is run by the rules of the dark forest. Now it's I'm intentionally simplifying a lot of the ideas here. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of how this actually works and how cosmic sociology might exist as an actual scientific um, endeavor and an actual science, read the book. It's really fascinating. Um, it sounds very logical internally. It's a bit difficult to follow, but I highly recommend that you try it. It's really bracing, stimulating reading. Some of the most fascinating and interesting science fiction that I've read in a very, very long time. Highly, highly recommend it.